Hi guys, and welcome back to another Apex Racing Academy setup tutorial. It's Alex Simpson here, and we are in the BMW M8 GTE, and we're going to be talking about the drivetrain today. Not a huge amount on the GTE cars to adjust, but more than the GT3s, that's for sure. So let's jump straight into it. And as before, like all of these videos, this is not how to set the car up from scratch, although it kind of is. This is more about trying to use the settings that are available to us to fine-tune it to your driving style based on the setup that the coach has given you. So it's pretty sort of basic, what affects understeer, oversteer, acceleration, grip, and things like that. So with that in mind, let's jump straight into it and let's talk about how we go about setting up the gearbox. Can be a bit daunting when you look at like all these different permutations that you can adjust for. There's two trains of thought here. One is you go and set your first gear up first. Um, Now, it may be that you're at a circuit that doesn't have the use of first gear in terms of how slow a corner. So I'm thinking circuits that might come into effect are like really, really tight hairpins. So like your Okayama hairpin or something like that. We're probably going to drop it down into first to get the kind of drive off the corner that we want. If it's not first gear, then it'll be second gear that we're trying to set up. Of course, we're limited to how high a speed we can have. 125 is max, but it might be usable at some circuits. Like I say, definitely Yokoyama is going to come into effect. I know iRacing certainly limit the gearboxes, so that they used to have it used to be a lot taller, and we used to see some crazy gearboxes. I remember the World Championship days, like we would start this gear really high for it to actually be usable, which was yeah, a bit weird, and then they restricted it, and suddenly we're just using second instead. Um, but yeah, so keep that in mind. It might actually be second gear, it might be your optimal gear that you need to set. So what we do, like I say, we find the slowest corner on the circuit, and we kind of set it. We look at the speeds, and we kind of set that gear to try and give us as much drive off of that corner as possible. Now we don't want wheel spin, so we don't want to set it so low that if we floor it, basically coming out of the corner, that the traction control is going nuts and we're getting huge amounts of wheel spin. So we'll kind of set that so that perhaps it will, we don't want the car to bog down as well. That's the other effect. So we want it just in between really. So we are just getting good drive off of the corner, and we are really close to our power band so that we get maximum acceleration off the corner without getting wheel spin. Of course, the coach is going to have got that roughly in the right place, but for yourself, for example, you might actually struggle to maintain the speed through the corner that they do, and in which case you might have to actually bring this gear down so that you get better acceleration off the corner. Or it might be the other way around. Actually, you're carrying more speed through the corner, and then you can afford to actually come up on the gear to um, uh, so that you're not wheel spinning kind of thing, because you're already in a high enough RPM range. Yeah, so you would adjust it that way. So sorry, even got myself confused there. So yes, so if you've got bogged down car, you want to go lower on this gear ratio, which is actually a higher number. But if you're getting a bit too much wheel spin, then you want to come down on this number here. What we will do is we will not worry too much about, say, second, third, fourth, fifth, or whichever gears we're using. If it is first gear, then it will be all the way through. And we look at our top gear, we look at our sixth gear. And what we'll do is we'll slipstream a teammate on the longest straight of the circuit, and we will find out what the maximum speed is we can achieve in the draft. And we will then set our gear so that we peak out just as we get into the braking zone in the draft. What we don't want is we don't want to hit the rev limiter too early on the straight when we're drafting, but of course we want to have the maximum speed available to us so that when we are in the draft, so we can get alongside into the braking zones. So yeah, that's kind of what we will do, slipstream and adjust it accordingly, so that we peaked out. That gives us our slowest gear and our highest gear on the particular circuit that we are dealing with. So every circuit's going to be a bit different. And then what we will do is we'll basically divide up the gaps between these these gear ratios evenly, so that there's a nice smooth acceleration profile through the gears. Now it may be um, that you just set them a little bit too far apart as you're going up, and you'll hear that the engine will bog down when you change up. Now typically the higher gear ratios will need a slightly smaller gap than the lower ones. The lower ones obviously can pull a bit better, so you find that the gaps could be slightly larger here and slightly smaller, sort of, your gaps between your fourth to fifth will be smaller than your third to fourth, and your fifth to sixth will be smaller than your fourth to fifth. But you'll hear it in the engine tone. Um, if this was an advanced course, I'd say go check VRS and Motec out to look at the acceleration profile in the telemetry, and you can then see where the engine RPM's dropping. If it's dropping too far, then typically you've just set those gear ratios wrong. But the coach is going to have done most of the work, so you're only really going to be perhaps affecting this, perhaps the acceleration gear. You'll never really need to touch this sixth gear. If you need that little bit more support, so then you'll do, because your wheel's spinning, then you'll change this, but then in turn, what you're probably going to need to do is change maybe third and fourth gears as well, just to get this acceleration profile back in the right way. Of course, if you went the other way, then again, you're probably going to change these gears, something like that, again, to get yourself back into that nice acceleration profile. The differential then, how this affects the car. So what the diff does is that allows us to go around corners. Without a diff, we have basically a solid drivetrain bar, drive shaft. There we go. That's what I was after. That goes from one side to the other, and that would mean the wheels spin at exactly the same time, and that would mean we can only go in a straight line. When we go around a corner, of course, our inside wheel is a lot slower than our outside wheel, and that's what allows us to go, basically turn through a corner. If we had a diff that was fully locked, then that would be the same as having just a drive shaft going from front to back, and we then would just, let's say, only be able to go in a straight line, because our inside wheel is traveling the same speed as our outside wheel. So yeah, we can turn the wheels. It would have some funny behavior. It'd want the car to go, let's say, straight on and things like that. So we can use the diff to adjust how much locking force we have. So more locking means more understeer, less locking, so on here, means more oversteer, or more rotation. And we can affect how the diff works on the way in, which is your coast ramp, and on the way out, which is your drive ramp. So coast means when you're not on the gas pedal. So I know some people think of coasting as you're not on the brake and you're not on the gas, but in terms of the diff, it just means not on the gas pedal. So that affects the way the car goes in. So a lower setting here, so if I went to 30, that would mean I have more turning available to me now. The car will turn more, the diff is freer. If I wanted to tighten it up a little bit, for example, where it was 40, so that I had a little bit of more stability going into the corners, then a 50 diff here would do that. So it'd give me just a fraction more understeer, just stabilize the car ever so slightly. So if you're losing the rear on the way in, then this is a really good option for you. That will just give you a little bit more stability. The ramp angle is actually coming out of the corner. So when you start to accelerate out of the corner, this will affect the car. So if the car rotates off the corner too much, or it feels like it's constantly, you're constantly having to counter steer it off the corner, then adjusting the diff here, so you've got more locking force, will actually just stabilize that car ever so slightly, and again that will make it just a little bit more understeery. But of course, if it's pushing like mad and you're constantly running off the edge of the circuit, then dropping this down here will allow it to be a little bit freer, and that will allow you to rotate off the corner just a little bit better. So that's how you can use the diff to affect the in and out specifically of the corner. But we also have an overall locking force as well. So let's just say the car is massively oversteering everywhere. What we can do is we can go up on the clutch plates here, and that will give us a lot more locking on both sides of the corner. Of course, if it's the other way around, you've got massive understeer, then you can come down on your clutch plates, or your friction faces as they call them on the GTE, and that will give you much more turn in. Now the diff preload also has the same effect, but it is a small adjustment compared to the faces. So say for example the coach, what was it? We were on a I don't know, something like that. So we were on a 10 with a 120 newton meters, and we were like, do you know what? We've got too much rotation all over. I want to lock it up. If you go from a 10 to a 12, you've made quite a huge change here. That is a lot. That's a big. You can see in the descriptions below. It's like 6 faces have 3 times the locking of 2. You know, so it's a times factor that you're adjusting. So keep that in mind when you're changing the clutch face. What you actually need to do. So a 10 120 is hugely more. It's hugely less than a 12 120. What I would do in this case, if you want just a little bit extra, you can go maybe to a 12 20, and this will give you slightly more locking force than what you had on the 10 120. But again, if that's not enough, then perhaps go up to like your 40, try a little bit more, and you should sort of be able to dial in a little bit better. Often people change these clutch plates here, but leave the preload the same, and they're like, whoa, no, that's terrible, yeah, I feel the understeer is way too much, or something like that, and the lap times just drop off because you just got chronic understeer now, in comparison to what you had. You know, you just shifted the balance far too much the other way. So keep that in mind, that if you change these friction plates here, then you would need to adjust your diff. Obviously, if you're going down, let's say it was on a 1230 and you went down to a 1030, now you're going to have massive more turning. So what you want to perhaps do is bring yourself up to, you know, a 10 130, something like that. That will give you a little bit more rotation off of the well, in and off of the corner. Right, I think that covers everything in terms of the diff and the drivetrain. If you have any questions on that, please tag me or one of the coaches on Discord. We'll come back to you as soon as possible. But for now, thanks very much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I will catch you for the next one.